Okay, we've got really mamish up to the top of page 14 over here. Um, there's a much deeper concept, way of looking at concept free will. We've said that the greatest good that God could give is himself. The purpose of creation is therefore to give man a chance to come close to God. We're speaking of coming close to God. We are not speaking of physical closeness. God exists in a realm far beyond the mere physical. We speak of close to God, we are speaking of spiritual closeness. Now, this is a fascinating concept because, really Hashem is beyond any degree of proximity to us, whether it's physical, because Hashem is not spatial, whether it's spiritual, because Hashem is not even spiritual. Hashem doesn't exist in a spiritual sense. If Hashem exists in the created spirit, he must exist outside of spirit. So therefore, how do you come close to Hashem? Especially according to Mukubalim, always say that you can't actually be close to Hashem since Hashem is beyond the Tzimtzum, and we're within the Tzimtzum. So Rabbi Kaplan here gives a fascinating, really fascinating idea, a suggestion about the sun, which we know from Chazal, but in a different light than we actually normally interpret it. He says, we speak according to close. We're not to God. We're not speaking of physical closeness. God exists in a realm far beyond mere physical. When we speak of God close to God, we speak of spiritual closeness, but not, again, not simple spirituality. But what is close to the non-physical sense? We find a hint of an answer in the teaching from the Talmud. The Torah states, "You shall follow the Lord your God, fear him and keep his commandments, obey him and serve him, and bind yourself to him." The Talmud asks, "How can one bind oneself to God? It is not written that the Lord your God, is consuming fire." So that's the same thing, like saying that Kosh Baruch Hu is beyond nature by saying that he's like a fire. It's a metaphor, right? We understand. It's telling us that there's no way to connect to Kosh Baruch Hu directly. The Talmud answers, we bind ourselves to God by imitating his attributes. In other words, Mahu Rachum af Atachanun af Atarachum Mahu Chanun af Atachanun. We resemble Kosh Baruch Hu, then we bind ourselves to Hashem. Now this is not saying which I expect from Rabbi Kaplan necessarily. Again, it's a Chazal, but it's the context is everything because Rabbi Kaplan is Chassid. It's a Breslover Chassid. Whether he was officially Breslover Chassid or not, he was in practice a Breslover Chassid. And you expect Chasidus, Dveykus means a sense of closeness to Kosh Baruch Hu comes from feeling close to Hashem by virtue of thinking of him, by virtue of speaking to him, by virtue of experiences like davening or singing and dancing, or he was having some connect meditative trance, or it's of course lamala but kodesh higher than that through some ruach hakodesh. But he's not. He's going with the Musar idea. The Musar idea is how do you connect Kodesh Baruch Hu? By being like a Kodesh Baruch Hu. And the Talmud is teaching us in a spiritual sense, closest is resemblance. The two things that resemble each other are close in spiritual sense. Things that differ are distant. The more two things resemble each other, the closer they are spiritually. I don't like the term spiritually here, but I guess there's no better term in the English language. I think really it's conceptually, right? Because we're talking about the concept of Rachmanis, the concept of Chanina, the concept of even Achzorius when it's necessary to be cruel. But we're talking about there's a conceptual closeness between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and us when we emulate HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And in the footnote here, it says a powerful idea, which he expounds upon elsewhere. I forget which I think in the book encounters. The main difference between the spiritual and the physical involves the concept of space. Physical space exists only in the physical world. In the spiritual domain, there's no concept of space as we know it. So Rabbi Kaplan says that how do you differentiate in that other book? How do you differentiate between things in the spiritual world by their characteristics? Since they have they have different characteristics, so therefore they are differentiated from each other. So he says a fascinating thing there. He says that the reason why a human being has to exist in the physical realm, the reason Kosh Baruch Hu gave us bodies, is because in the spiritual realm, the neshama and the neshama let's call it let's start with the Yetzer Tov, Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Hara cannot coexist. Why? Because they're completely different spiritually. So they're, or conceptually, as you want to, as whatever we put it. So therefore, there's no way they can exist simultaneously in proximity. By definition, they are karochok mizrach mimarav, like the distance between east and west in the spiritual conceptual sense. But if you bind the Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Hara to a physical entity, to the guf, so then they are perforce stuck together. They're connected. The body links them together. And so he says malachim are associated with heavenly spheres, with stars and constellations, etc., etc. Why? Why that association? He says an amazing thing. He says a malach is so similar to another malach that it would be impossible to differentiate between them because, again, there's no spatial differentiation. So therefore, what differentiates one malach from another malach? So he says that what differentiates a malach from another malach is the idea of its association with a physical entity. So now this is the malach of physical entity X and malach of physical entity Y. Now, X and Y don't even have to be that much different, but they're in different places. They're different. They're different substances. So therefore, the malachim are not differentiated because their association with something physical. So the physical world actually is a way to bring things together which otherwise could not be together. And you know that there's a fascinating Gemara, Chulin and the Yerushalmi, it's in Shabbos, I think, where it talks about Pinchas ben Yair and Rebbe, and Bavli is very different than the Yerushalmi, because in the Yerushalmi it seems that Rebbe is confident he and Rebbe Pinchas ben Yair will be together in Olam Haba, and the Bavli seems is not confident they'll be together in Olam Haba. And what the Bavli is saying is that this idea that in Olam Hazeh, two people can be in close proximity to each other. Rebbe and Pinchas ben Yair, of course, Rebbe was being a big honor, is being very modest, but Rebbe is being saying, I can be in close proximity to Pinchas ben Yair in this world, because in this world, proximity is determined by physical proximity. But in the world to come, I won't be able to be close to Rebbe Pinchas ben Yair because he is on a completely different astral plane of spirituality, and we're not going to resemble each other. And in the world to come, so then things which are different from each other are in very different places. If there's no physical place. There's only spiritual space. So. Connection is defined by spiritual similarity, and distance is defined by spiritual dissimilarity. Okay, that's all, but that brings out, in fact, the entire question: what exactly is the Olam HaNeshamos? Is it in fact a place with no space, or is there a space that's just not our kind of space? So I don't know how we answer that question, but it seems that. Even if it's a different kind of space, it is a space, but not a different kind of space. But nevertheless, there is this idea that things which are similar spiritually can be connected in the Olam Emes. Things which are dissimilar spiritually can't be connected in the Olam Emes. By the way, it brings up the ancient question of which the non-Jews used to mock the Jewish Kabbalists, was that the Kabbalists would argue how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. And of course, the answer is an infinite number of angels can dance on the head of a pin because angels exist in spiritual realm, not a physical realm. So therefore, there's no limitation to how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. But in any event, so the idea is that two things resemble each other. They're close. And again, as he says here on page 14, spiritually, but I think the term is better to say conceptually. So therefore, what the Bali Musar are saying, and again, it's from this Chazal of Ma'urachum B'Atzal Chanun, which is in Slaita Daf Yud Dalet, according to the footnotes here. So it's telling us there's a way to be close to Hashem, even after the Tzimtzum, even within the Tzimtzum. which is by emulating Kodesh Baruch Hu. Because in the spiritual realm, you are in proximity, and even if you don't know it, to the entity which you resemble. Again, this is not standard Hasidic Dveykus. Standard Hasidic Dveykus would be, let's say you feel a hiskashrus, a connection to your Rebbe. So that would be the closeness to it. But your hiskashrus, you might being a good person might be part of hiskashrus, but hiskashrus is much greater than being a good person. It's much more of a spiritual connection through some sort of sense of affinity, some sort of sense of connectedness, as opposed to emulation. So what we're saying here is that no, that type of dveikus is not the type of dveikus which we're referencing. The dveikus we're referencing is a dveikus, a connection which comes because of similarity. Things that are similar are in spiritual proximity. And again, as I said, I keep on quibbling about this, but it does bother me. I think it's more conceptual proximity. But okay. So we can now understand the reason for free will in a deeper sense. As stated earlier, the good that God's plan has destined for his world is the ultimate good. Namely, God himself. His plan is to give a creature, namely man, the opportunity to draw close to him. But we speak of giving such good, we immediately face a dilemma. It's a beautiful paragraph. God is the giver, and man the receiver, and as such, they are two opposites. In a spiritual sense, they are as far from each other as north and south. Giver and receiver are exact opposites. As long as man is a mere receiver, he stands at the opposite pole away from God, the giver. In a spiritual sense, man and God would then be ultimately distant from each other. Okay, now this is not this true about man and God. It's true about any giver and receiver. Again, because we exist in the physical world, so therefore, even though some people are givers, some people are receivers, they actually come together, right? And they can be physically present and interacting with each other. But in a spiritual sense or a conceptual sense, a giver and a receiver are completely different from each other. And therefore, there's no connection, no affinity between the two of them. It's important to know with tzedakah. Well, before I get, in yeshiva, this is a lot of a cynical comment right now. But okay, you don't know I'm a cynic by now, and you haven't been hanging around me at all. But in yeshiva, we're taught that when we take money from people to learn Torah, we're doing them a favor, right? Because we're being mezakeh them in a tremendous mitzvah, right? It's a tremendous chus for them to give us Torah and we're to give us money to support our learning, and we're therefore really giving them. They're not giving us. So that's one of the ways in which we get around the problem of how can you learn Torah and take for it. You're supposed to be a giver. You're supposed to emulate a Kodesh Baruch Hu and give, and that's why you're not supposed to be to take money to teach Torah. You should do it free. Just like Kodesh Baruch Hu does it for free. So the answer we give ourselves is, and I'm not saying it's wrong. It's just that it's a bit too convenient sometimes. Is that it would say that no, we're giving to them much more than we're taking from them. They give us money, but we give them tremendous chus. We give them tremendous credit in oil haba. So therefore, we're actually giving much more than we're taking. Okay, that's the question is to what extent one is allowed to take one such a perspective at oneself, and whether it can bring to gaiva. There are all sorts of different questions in it. But the idea of somebody giving tzedakah, also, the person there's a lashon chazal when the person asks for tzedakah, he says zakeyimi, achieve merit with me. Give me tzedakah, it's a merit for you. And the person who's receiving the tzedakah, in theory, although it's not necessarily going to work and probably not most of the time doesn't work, but in theory, it can be considered to be giving to the person giving him tzedakah, because they're giving the opportunity to be zoiche in this tremendous mitzvah. Again, it's oversimplified. It doesn't work that way in practice that well as it does in theory. But this is the idea that a person in a relationship between a giver and receiver, the receiver can overcome the deficit of being a receiver by the fact that they're actually giving back, or even sometimes, as we explained, by the act of because the act of receiving is act of giving, and that reflects itself in halacha. Halacha, there's halacha of mikudeshes midin adam chashuv. The Gemara says in Kedushin, I think it's Dav Zayin, Dav Zayin. So if a woman gives a man a gift, and he's a type man which normally doesn't accept gifts, because right? Somebody hates gifts, survives. This person takes a gift, but this man takes a gift. The Adam, he's an Adam Chashuv, normally doesn't take gifts. He takes a gift from his woman. The man can say to the woman, Harei Mekudeshes li, you're married to me, Bano Azu, with this pleasure you're getting, that I accept of you a gift. So there's this concept of the recipient becoming the giver. Now again, it doesn't always work, but it is a halachic concept. Okay, so so the question is, how do we become givers? That we should emulate HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So therefore, God arranged things that man himself would be a creator of his own good and master of his own perfection. Meaning that we exercise free will to be good. Were we just automatons, just robots, and even we doing good, we're not being good. It's the difference between doing good and being good. You can do good and not have the right intentions, or not have any intentions. To be good means you intend to do the good thing because it's good to do. So therefore, your bechira chavshis, your free will to do good, that's what makes you like HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So having free will is advantageous in that it allows you to be davik in Hashem by being like HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's a beautiful idea. Because it says, again, therefore God arranges things so man himself would be the creator of his own good and the master of his own perfection. As a result, he would resemble his creator and enjoy the greatest possible degree of closeness to the divine. Okay, in the footnotes he says that Ramchal discusses in a number of places. Thus, free-willed man is the primary and essential element in creation. Because only man, because he can be intentional, can have this idea, become a giver in the same way HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives. If it's not an act of will, if it's an act of intuition, then it's not like HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If a parent gives to a child just because it's the intuition of a parent to give to a child, it's no different than a lioness giving its cub. It's not an act of bechira. It's not an act of bechira. It's not an act of will. It's not an act of goodness. It's instinct. It has to be a deliberate, conscious decision to be good. Okay, so this is and that would be that brings a person to the level of connecting to Hashem. So again, thus free-willed man is the primary essential element of creation. Everything else created is only a means to bringing about man's closest to God. All other created things, whether above or below man, above meaning malachim, exists only for his sake, to provide an environment where he can earn his place in the world, in a world which is all good. So it's interesting that he brings down here in the footnotes that this is from the Derech Hashem, based on Kos Rabbah, Sanhedrin, Zohar, and Musadeus, Ikarim. But then he says the Rambam Maimonides apparently disputes this in Moreh Nevuchim 3:13. Then he says you should look in the Leshem, who have now probably, I'm assuming based on the context, tries to reconcile the Rambam. The Rambam seems to hold that other entities do exist for their own sakes. In other words, that entities like the marine creatures which live in the Marianas Trench, the Marianas Trench, I forget what it's called, a very deep trench in the Pacific Ocean, 30,000 feet under the sea. So we have, from the normative Jewish perspective, one has to find some sort of correlation between them and human beings. That somehow they exist for the purpose of humanity and they serve humanity. And I'm sure there are ways of doing so. Once they're discovered, they certainly things which are have a benefit for humanity. But according to the Rambam, no, because Baruch Hu could create those fish, those marine creatures, which dwell 30,000 feet beneath the surface of the ocean and never interact with human beings for their own purpose. And this, of course, will lead to a whole discussion about malachim. Malachim have their own purpose, don't have their own purpose. And it probably is also linked to the question of whether malachim have free will. Rav Dessler holds that malachim do not have free will. The Or Sameach holds they do have free will. I'm sure you can find earlier sources on both sides, but those sources which stick in my mind. And the idea of according to Dessler is malachim are pre-programmed to do what Hakadosh Baruch Hu tells them to do, or sometimes human beings can be the reason why malachim do things, but they're pre-programmed. According to the Or Sameach, they're not pre-programmed, but they rarely exercise bechira. Because if you were in the presence of Hakadosh Baruch Hu, then you wouldn't exercise bechira. You wouldn't exercise bechira too. They say about Rabbi Chanan, I don't know. I don't know if I ever saw it inside, but they say that Rabbi Chanan used to say over every Purim the story of how he saw the Chavetz Chaim remove a dibuk from a person, and he said that since then he has no schar, no reward for his bechira to choose in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because no bechira in his emunah. Because once you saw the Chavetz Chaim exorcise a dibuk, how can you not believe that there's a olam esel yonim and that there's a God and that all these things exist? So this idea is that the malachim are in such a position, a proximity, a consciousness and awareness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that how are they ever going to sin? It's not they don't have free will. When they come down here below, they can sin. But in Shamayim, they don't sin because they're not. There's too much emes there, and that's of course the one of the interpretations. I think is the Maharal, if I recall correctly. Leads to Maharsha. Kafalem Harkigik is that it says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu forced Am Yisrael to accept the Torah, and not that literally he held a mountain over their head, but when you're confronted with that type of gilui, that type of revelation, there's no way you can actually deny it and say, "Oh, there is no God," right? So therefore, they had no choice but to accept Torah because they were shown that this is the truth. And once you confront the truth, unless you're insane or criminal, you're not going to deny it. So therefore, it's not an act of free will. It's compelled. You're compelled by recognition, but it's also for being compelled. So so again, the question is whether malachim they don't have bechira, or they usually don't have not in a place where they exercise bechira. Important to note that also relates to how the Or Sameach versus the deal with the sins of malachim, the parents' sins of malachim when they come down to this world, like when the malachim said, "We're going to destroy the city of stone," and they were punished for that. So according to Rav Dessler, they didn't actually sin; they were pre-programmed to do what they did. But pre-programmed doesn't mean there isn't cause and effect. But they were pre-programmed. According to Or Sameach, no, not pre-programmed. And when they come, in Shemayim, they wouldn't have committed sins. When they come down to earth, they do commit sins. So, but again, according to the Rambam, it's possible malachim have their own independent purpose. I don't remember it's Rabbi Kaplan. I think it might be somebody else, but I think it might be Rabbi Kaplan who says that there is extraterrestrial life. There are aliens, but they don't have free will. Maybe it was like Norman Lamb is extraterrestrial life, because I can't imagine Rabbi Kaplan writing this. I don't remember that 100%. But the question is again, if everything's for Yisrael, so can there be aliens, extraterrestrial life, which actually has its own free will and its own system of reward and punishment? I don't know why not. But whoever it was that wrote that article, and again, I don't remember who it was, I think it might have been Rabbi Kaplan, says, no, there's only one entity in the world, in the universe, which has this idea of free will. That's us. So therefore, there could be aliens. Sure, why not? But wouldn't have free will. Okay, so that's this idea. Everything which exists is only in order to provide us an environment where we can, where he can earn his place in the world, which is all good. There are therefore two basic concepts which comprise the human. Let me just see what's in the chat here. What is the largest justification for Torah learning? Yisachar Zvulun. Well, Yisachar Zvulun is not the halachic justification for Torah learning. The halachic justification for Torah learning is I'm going to digress here. First, I'm going to answer, then I'm going to digress. We see press in the Gemara like writing down Torah in case you're going to forget it. You're allowed to bend the rules, and the taking to pay for learning Torah also is bending the rules. Now, I once had a conversation about this with Rabbi Soloveitchik. You probably heard, this from me once, with Rabbi Soloveitchik about this idea of Eis Lassos for bending the rules, and he said, "We're actually, I'm, I'm not disagreeing with him. I'm just telling you what he said. He said we're actually a true isser to take money to learn Torah, a true isser like eating treif, then there'd be no Eis Lassos. Can't bend the rules." But when the Rambam uses the lashon of isser, like the isser to take money to learn Torah, sometimes he doesn't mean it's an actual prohibition. He means it's a davar meguna admod. It's a very bad thing, very repulsive thing, but not absolutely prohibited. And there are there's a lot of evidence for that perspective. So therefore, it's isser is not an isser d'oraisa. It's not isser rabbanan. It's something which is not appropriate. Where things are not appropriate, we can bend the rules. If you don't hold like Rabbi Soloveitchik in that respect, so then it's much more, you can say pshuto that there's sometimes where, it's aver lishma. Eis Lassos is like aver lishma. That's what the Psaltic says. If you, there's certain times where we do averos, but we do them Shem Shemaim, and because they're necessary. Of course, not everybody can make that decision on their own. Very few people can make that decision on their own. But those who decide we take money to learn Torah, that was their decision. That was their perspective. Now, years ago, when I was my first year in Shalvim, so it's going back into the late 70s. So there was a Rebbe there, Reb Serevnik, I think he's still alive and sort of thriving, Shlita, who gave a shir at the shir I went to, Shir Aleph, and he was teaching about the boys who are going to the army. And he says, tell you about the theory of why in Haredi yeshivas they don't go to the army. And he said the reason why the Haredi yeshivas don't go to the army is because he spoke into their Rosh Yeshiva. I don't think they admit to this today, but he said back then that they that they would give the rationale today. But he said the real rationale is the same rationale of Eis Lassos. Although according to the strict letter of the law, how can you possibly not go to the army to save Klal Yisrael from their enemies? But the yeshivas would not be able to function properly if all the Bachrim went into the army on a regular basis. So therefore, it's like a Rosh Shah, a temporary situation, an extraordinary situation where we have no choice but to not go to the army. So again, it's the idea of Eis Lassos. So this idea of Eis Lassos actually is far more reaching implications than people normally perhaps realize. And even the idea of aver lishma within certain very, very obvious parameters about not making decisions on your own because of your vested interest does have application. So Yisrael's Zvulun is not a problem because Yisrael's Zvulun is voluntary. Yisrael's Zvulun is not, nobody's mandating it. The whole issue is that that a formal arrangement where the community mandates support for Torah scholars. If you want to go and give money to a Torah scholar on your own, that's not a problem. The whole issue was the community supporting them. So therefore, this idea of Yisrael Zvulun is a separate idea, and that's not the basis for yeshivas. Okay, so getting back to where we are, so he says that there are therefore two basic concepts which comprise human existence. First, man must earn the good that God has prepared. Second, he must receive this good. Okay, so there is earning that good is through bechira chavshis, that free will by which we emulate HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Then we have to be able to receive that good. There's, however, a basic difference in the environment required to actualize these two concepts. For earning his own perfection closest to the Thank you. You're welcome. For earning his own perfection closest to the divine, the maximum possible challenge is required. This in turn results in the greatest possible pleasure of accomplishment. Right? Lefum tzara agra. The more effort, the more reward. And such an environment must therefore be one where neither God himself nor the divine nature of our deeds is obvious. must be a world where God is hidden and where good can only be accomplished with great difficulty. He wrote this in the Aryeh Kaplan anthology. He has this beautiful essay, "If You Were God," right? How God had to calibrate things very precisely in order that there should be a precise amount of Gilui, precise amount of Hester, precise amount of revelation, precise amounts of concealment. And the name Shaddai, Shindal Yud, is the name which is associated with Shamar Lola Modai. Hashem carefully calibrated things. The place where man receives good, on the other hand, must be the exact opposite. In order for man to enjoy the maximum possible pleasure for what he has done, the true nature of his deeds must be obvious as possible. This of God must also be as apparent as possible in such a world. It must be an environment where man realizes the goodness of his deeds and their relationship to God. So, the world about Vaida, it's got to be a world of Hester. The world of Schak, is the world of Gilui. It is for this reason God created two levels of existence. First, there is this world, Olam Hazeh, place of accomplishment and maximum challenge. Secondly, there's the world to come, Olam Haba, the world of ultimate reward, where both God's existence and the nature of one's deeds are totally apparent. Okay, so there, the Olam Hazeh and Olam Haba are two very different things, but it's not that simple because Rabbi Kaplan himself has, the idea of the seven worlds, right? And it's not black and white; it's shades of gray, because each of the seven worlds, one after another, is more revealed than the prior world, but it's not full revelation. There's still plenty of concealment. So things are going gradations. They don't jump from being concealment to revelation. And of course, within the world itself, there are times of concealment, times of revelation. Things oscillate back and forth. But overall, with a very big generalization, so the more revelation, the more it's a world of reward, the less a world of challenge. The more concealment, the more it's a world of avoda, of challenge, and less a world of reward. And we need to have the challenge in order to have that sense of accomplishment. That sense of accomplishment, when we can look back and enjoy it, is part of the reward which we feel. Okay, again, it's in broad strokes, because in this world itself, if I give a good cheer just now, I feel afterwards a sense of reward. So there's this, and then goes to the next challenge. So all this oscillates not just between Olam Hazeh and Olam Haba, but all the time in throughout a person's life. Challenge, a sense of accomplishment. Challenge, sense of accomplishment. That's part of the thrill of being alive. Okay, so I think we'll stop here because I'm going to get there. The Zoom has a tendency to cut us off early, and we're at the end of a section over here. So we will stop here for today till after Pesach. I don't think next week is going to be a good time to learn. So I wish everybody Chag Kosher Sameach, and we'll pick it up in 3 weeks from tonight, Emir Hashem.
Chag Kosher Sameach. Good Shabbos.
Okay.
Thank you. Shabbos.
Shabbos.